Welcome to Designing with Everyone in Mind, Color Contrast, Color Reliance, and Accessibility. My name is Valdez Bean, and I'll be taking you through this training today. To give you an overview of what we'll be talking about in this training, first we'll discuss what is color contrast. Then we'll talk about why is color contrast an accessibility concern. Then we'll talk about the WCAG 2.1 AA compliance standard. Then I'll show you the WebAIM color contrast checker. Next, we'll talk about what is color contrast and why is color contrast an accessibility concern. And then we'll talk about examples of color reliance. First, what is color contrast? Color contrast is the difference in brightness between two colors. As you can see in this image, we have an example of high contrast grayscale, low contrast grayscale, high contrast colors, and low contrast colors. So why is color contrast an accessibility concern? Low contrast between the colors of text and background makes it difficult for both non-disabled people and people with vision disabilities to read text. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG, were developed by the World Wide Web Consortium, W3C. UNF's standard and goal for accessibility is the WCAG 2.1 AA standards. According to WCAG 2.1 AA standards, regular text must have a contrast ratio of at least 4.5 to 1 between the text and the background. Large text must have a contrast ratio of at least 3 to 1. Large text is defined as 14-point and bold or larger, or 18-point or larger. For graphics and interface components, a color contrast of at least 3 to 1 is required. Here is WebAIM's color contrast checker. As you can see, you can put the hex value of both your text and your background in the checker, and it will provide you the contrast ratio to compare to the WCAG guidelines. In this example, our text passes the WCAG AA guidelines as is needed per UNF's standard. Here's an example of color contrast issues. Our example box and text is to the left, of a dark blue text and lighter blue background. I've taken the hex value of the text and the hex value of the background and plugged it into WebAIM's contrast checker. As you can see, our contrast ratio is only 2.28 to 1, which means that we fail the WCAG AA guidelines for normal text, large text, and graphical objects and user interface components. Here's another example of color contrast, a dark blue text and a light blue background. I've taken the hex values of both the text and the background and plugged it into our contrast checker. Our contrast ratio is 5.05 to 1. Looking at the guidelines for WCAG AA, we pass for normal text, large text, and graphical objects and user interface components. Now, let's talk about what is color reliance. Color reliance means using hue, shade, tint, or tone as the sole means of conveying information, distinguishing content, or indicating an action. So why is color reliance an accessibility concern? Relying on color to convey content will impact blind users as page colors are not identified by screen readers, users with low vision who may override page colors, and users with color vision deficiency or color blindness who may have difficulty differentiating between certain colors. Here's an example of color reliance. In this table, we have a column for boxes with green or red, as well as do's and don'ts in the second column. In the first column, we have a green box next to check pages for color reliance, and then a red box next to use highlighting of words to show which questions to answer. On this table, if there was somebody who could not see the colors, they would not know whether it was a do or a don't. Here's what you could do instead. Instead of color boxes of green or red, you could use the words do or don't, and if you still want to use color, you could use font color to show green, do, or red, don't. This way, you're not only relying on color to convey the meaning of do or don't. Here's another example of color reliance. In this pie chart, we have dark blue to show first quarter, orange to show second quarter, green to show third quarter, and a light blue to show fourth quarter. If someone was not able to see these colors or unable to differentiate blue from green or orange, they would not be able to interpret this chart correctly. Here's what we could do instead. We can still use that same pie chart with colors showing the different quarters, but these parts of the pie chart are also labeled with what quarter they are. So that means we don't have to give up using colors to show information, as long as there's a secondary way for someone to also know what that information means. This has been Designing with Everyone in Mind: Color Contrast, Color Reliance, and Accessibility. My name is Valdis Bean, and thank you for your time today.